Welcome to a video tutorial on Ernest Hemingway's Farewell to Arms, published in 1929. This is his most famous novel, and it's his third major work that he published, and it really is the novel that put Hemingway on the literary scene as the definitive war novelist of the 20th century. So just to recall the timeline here, Hemingway published In Our Time. That short story collection was very innovative and influenced by American poetic principles in 1925. Then he published The Sun Also Rises, the post-World War I novel about disillusionment and despair and a bunch of expatriates in post-World War I Europe. But the 1929 publication of The Farewell Arms captured Hemingway's experience on the Italian-Austrian front in World War I, and really showed him as an innovative writer with something new to say about war. And we get the beginnings of Hemingway's code here in Farewell to Arms, his desire to find a context in which he can act nobly with dignity and in a way that strengthens him. And we really get this powerful understanding of Hemingway's commitment to love. We know that being faithful to and in love is one of the code principles that emerges in these texts, while the relationship between Frederick Henry, great patriotic name, and Catherine Barclay, this English nurse, is an intense love affair in the context of war in which either of them could die at any time, which adds this sort of passion to their love, and they are reunited after the war, or during the war, when Frederick Henry escapes during the Italian retreat at Caporetto from the Austrian offensive, and they get in a boat together to Switzerland, the neutral country, and they live in the mountains and wait for Catherine to give birth. And as we know with all Hemingway texts, that things do not go well, things end badly, but it's the process toward how things end that matters. It's how you get to an ending that matters and defines the self. And so, here we have in those 5 books you're seeing right there, this trajectory of the novel, and along the way we learn a lot about criticism of war. We learn a lot about Hemingway's rejection of false abstractions, his commitment to love, and his belief in creating his own individual coded way of being, that we hope and we believe Frederick Henry will then realize after his experience in the mountains in Switzerland and after World War I. But let's talk about his style. Most great commentary about Hemingway's works will begin and end with his innovative style. Here we see the journalistic influence upon Hemingway. Remember, he was a journalist for the Kansas City Star before he started writing novels. And in the opening chapter, where he captures this sort of panoramic landscape of the Italian front, he does so objectively and as a journalist, with strong nouns and verbs, very few adjectives and adverbs. And the unique thing about this opening chapter is the coordination of 39 ands. Hemingway very rarely wrote in long sentences. This opening chapter is almost one sentence and has 39 conjunctions, and that creates this, as you can see down here, that creates this panoramic landscape that all images and spaces and times are equally important. There's no subordination. All facts are there, are presented without saying one is more important than the other. And so it's a reality that is captured in the prose, that is revisited by the mind of a soldier we can imagine suffering from post-traumatic disorder, where all the details are extremely vivid. Just a side note here, when powerful things happen psychologically, like you learn of the death of a loved one, you can remember the smell from the kitchen. You can remember what page you were reading in the book. You can remember the most bizarre details because it's infused upon the brain, and that's what Hemingway was trying to capture in this opening chapter. So let's take a look at it. I'm going to read a little bit to you so you can get the sense of what he was trying to do with this panoramic series of 39 conjunctions. In the late summer of that year, we lived in a house in a village that looked across the river and the plain to the mountains. In the bed of the river there were pebbles, boulders, dry and white in the sun. The water was clear and swiftly moving and blue in the channels. Troops went by the house and down the road, and the dust they raised powdered the leaves of the trees. The trunks of trees, too, were dusty, and the leaves fell early that year, and we saw the troops marching along the road, and the dust rising, and leaves stirred by the breeze falling, and the soldiers marching, and afterward the road bare and white except for the leaves. The plain was rich with crops. There were many orchards of fruit trees, and beyond the plain the mountains were brown and bare. There was fighting in the mountains. At night we could see the flashes from the artillery. In the dark it was like summer lightning, but the nights were cool, and there was not the feeling of a storm coming. Sometimes in the dark we heard the troops marching under the window and the guns going past pulled by motor tractors. There was much traffic at night, many mules on the road, and boxes of ammunition on each side of their pack saddles, and gray motor trucks that carried men, and other trucks with loads covered with canvas that moved slower in the traffic. There were big guns, too, that passed in the day drawn by tractors. The long barrels of the guns covered with green branches and green leafy branches and vines laid over the tractors. To the north we could see across a valley and see a forest of chestnut trees, and behind it another mountain on this side of the river. There was fighting for that mountain too, but it was not successful, and in the fall when the rains came the leaves all fell, and the chestnut trees and the branches were bare and trunks black with rain. The vineyards were thin and bare branched too, and all the country wet and brown and dead with the autumn. There were mists over the river and clouds on the mountain, and the trucks splashed mud on the road, and the troops were muddy and wet in their capes. Their rifles were wet, and under their capes the 2 leather cartridge boxes on the front of the belt, gray leather boxes heavy with packs of clips of thin, long 6.5 millimeter cartridges bulged forward under the cape so that the men passing on the road marched as though they were 6 months gone with child. Notice the detail and the repetition of the trees, the chestnut trees, the wet, the mud, the fall, the ongoing march that was once in the summer, and again it seems like it's continuing to go on in the fall. There were small gray motor cars that passed going very fast. Usually there was an officer on the seat with a driver and more officers in the back seat. They splashed more mud in the canyons. Even if one of the officers in the back was very small and sitting between 2 generals, he himself so small that you could not see his face, but only the top of his cap and his narrow back. And if the car went especially fast, it was probably the king. He lived in Uden and came out in this way nearly every day to see how things were going, and things went very badly. At the start of the winter came the permanent rain, and with the rain came the cholera. But it was checked, and in the end, only 7,000 died of it in the army. There's that deadpan understatement and the objective tone. So we have this paratactic style. That means conjunctions creates a panorama, and each detail is a separate time and space, and nothing is subordinated. But at the end, we get the permanent rain bringing the disease of cholera and 7,000 dying of it. Right? We weren't ready for that. We imagined the men are dying of these wounds, and they did, certainly. But even beyond that, there was this disease. Even the landscape itself was foreboding, and ultimately fatal. Amazing opening chapter, places you there, and you realize that this is a context of war and landscape that was going to destroy men's will to live. Let's keep going. So the landscape itself also gains some symbolic importance. Very briefly, the mountains in this text are pristine and cold and clean, a place where snow will stop the war. And the town is wet and muddy and full of disease and decay, and loss and pain and hospitals and sordidness and immorality and whorehouses and dejection and disillusionment with the war, and disillusionment with themselves. And so the mountains, through the priest that is in the opening chapters, that the priest, it comes from a mountain town called Abruzzi, a peasant town, a Basque town, where it's a place of codedness. It's a place where people have a lot of dignity. They take pride in their work. They take pride in their life. They love their God. Where it isn't a joke to have faith in God. It's a place of sacredness, the mountains, and the plains are a place of um, of secular behavior, but more than that, of sordidness and immorality. And so right away we get this symbolic pull between the mountains, where ultimately Fred and Catherine wind up going and living this intense love relationship, and you get this sense of the plain where the war, where the front is in between battles and the war, and we get immoral behavior. So clearly, faith in the town, faith in the mountains, and faithlessness in the town. Let's walk through some key passages to help you be able to take on the online discussion and be able to write a paper about this. So right away we get the soldiers mocking the priest, as if the priest were going, and pretending that the priest likes to go to the whorehouses, and mocking him for having faith in God. And you can tell right away it makes Frederick Henry uncomfortable. And when he talks about his place, his hometown of Abruzzi is a cold, clean place where the hunting is good and people take off their hats, where it's unlawful to serenade women. It's a place that I think intrigues Frederick Henry, a place where that he's been looking for all his life, that he was hoping to get at war, a place where he could conduct himself in a way that would define himself with nobility and honor. And here's a quote. I had gone, this is when Frederick was on leave, he told the priest he might go check out Abruzzi. He doesn't, he goes to Milan. And he says this, I'd gone to a place where the roads were frozen and hard as iron, where it was clear and cold and dry, and the snow was dry and powdery, and hair tracks in the snow, and the peasants took off their hats and called you Lord. And there was good hunting. I'd gone to no such place, but to the smoke of cafes, and nights when the room whirled and you needed to look at the wall to make it stop, nights in bed, drunk when you knew that was all there was, and the strange excitement of waking and not knowing who it was with you, and the world all unreal in the dark and so exciting that you must resume again unknowing and not caring in the night, sure that this was all and all and all and not caring. Suddenly to care very much, and to sleep, to wake with it sometimes morning, and all that had been there gone, and everything sharp and hard and clear, and sometimes a dispute about the cost. Sometimes still pleasant and fond and warm, and breakfast and lunch. Sometimes all niceness gone and glad to get out on the street, but always another day starting, and then another night. I try to tell about the night and the difference between the night and the day, and how the night was better unless the day was very clean and cold, and I could not tell it, as I cannot tell it now. So here we have Frederick Henry talking about his inability to find a place where he can conduct himself nobly in a coded way. He finds himself waiting for the night and acting in an immoral way when he's gone from the war. And so when he comes back to the war, he's looking for war as a context in which he's going to be able to prove himself as effective, prove himself as brave and courageous and noble and fighting for a good cause. Something that will be debunked as Frederick grows in this novel. When he comes back, he realizes straight away that he is not missed, and that the war went on, and the ambulance service was functioning fine without him, and he reflects on the futility of his personal actions at war. It seemed to have no effect whether he's there or not. And then we get Catherine Barclay. We meet Catherine Barclay. He's immediately attracted to her, but only attracted physically, and he's really in no interest in a love relationship. And so then he finds out from Catherine that she was engaged to a man, a British man who fought in the war, and she was hoping he'd come back with a picturesque wound Um, and what she found out, and what led to her disillusionment and her rejection of all false abstractions about the nobility of actions at war, stem from I was to marry this comment right here. I was to marry him, and then of course he was killed, and that was the end of it. He came home in pieces. No picturesque wound, no saber cut. This was a different type of war, and machinery certainly changed how people were killed. So Catherine is initiated. She is already there, already able to conduct herself well as a nurse, but harbors no belief that this war is a place where one can be commit themselves to a noble cause. She sees through the futility of this war. But Fred isn't there yet. Continuing on with the initiated and uninitiated in this novel, clearly Catherine Barclay, with her fiancé coming home in bits and pieces, has no faith in the noble purpose of war, and she's very much aware that death can come gratuitously, as it says at the top here, without the slightest reference to the rules. Death can also come as a consequence for ignorance of the rules. Either way, death is coming. And it does matter how one approaches death. And so we also have Rinaldi. This is Frederick Henry's best friend at the war. He's a surgeon, and he walks around the Italian front on the plain with a holster stuffed with toilet paper. So it looks like he's carrying a gun, but he's not. He is so far from believing in killing somebody that he just mocks it by carrying around a toilet paper roll. But Fred isn't quite there yet, not only with war, as far as initiated with his disillusionment with war, and he isn't quite initiated to commit himself to love, because as we said from the previous quote, he goes to Milan and all he does is sleep with women and not know who they are and drink too much, and so he's not committed to love at all. But when he begins to meet Frederick Catherine, he stops going to the Villa Rosa, the whorehouse in the Italian front, and he misses her. He says on page 41, I felt low and hollow when I wasn't with her, and he felt horribly that he was too late to meet her for a date, and she was gone. So one of the things that emerges early on in the novel is that we really don't know the value of a thing until it is gone, and he has great fear that his relationship with Catherine might be ruined by his unwillingness to commit to her and be in love with her. And here he is in this sort of naive approach to love. He says, yes, I lied, I love you. This was a game, like bridge. You pretended you were playing for some stakes. Nobody mentioned what the stakes were. When I could not see her, I was feeling lonely and hollow. And so, he admits that he had lied to her when he said he loved her, and he approached this relationship like it was a game, but now he's starting to begin to feel lonely and hollow without her, and he needs to learn to follow the code on love, to be faithful to and in love. And he talks to the priest, and he asks the priest about how he has faith, and the priest says, well, I have faith in, you'll have faith in God when you love someone else beyond yourself. And the priest said something really interesting. He said, when you are in love, when you wish to do things for them, when you wish to make sacrifices for them, you wish to serve them, and this will lead to a faith in God. And so he says, look, you're not there yet. He says this to Frederick, you haven't loved anyone beyond yourself. He's not even quite sure that he loves himself, but when you do love someone else and learn to love yourself, you will learn to love God. And so that's an emerging theme in this book, and we are, on this trajectory to seeing if Frederick will realize that for himself. When he goes back to the front, he accepts a St. Anthony token, basically cross, that he's supposed to wear around his neck. but he doesn't do so. He puts it in his pocket because he's not religious. He receives it from Catherine. But then as he's taking a ride out to the front, the driver says that he always wears a St. Anthony, and that he has faith, and it's not a joke, and it's not going to help you in his pockets. There's another sort of tidbit about Frederick's lack of faith in the self, lack of faith in God, and lack of faith in love. Well, part of Frederick's initiation comes when he is shot. It's an important passage, and it's got an important stylistic technique, which is delayed decoding. And it's just like the moment when Hemingway himself was shot working for the Italian ambulance service in World War I, handing out chocolates to wounded shoulders. Boom, shrapnel went right into his thigh, and that was his injury that led to Ernest Hemingway coming home to Oak Park, Illinois. But here he is creating a fictional moment where he's eating cheese and drinking wine, and then they get ambushed. And it goes as follows. I ate the end of my piece of cheese and took a swallow of wine. Through the other noise, I heard a cough. Then came the ch-ch-ch-ch-ch, and then there was a flash, as when a blast furnace doors swung open, and a roar that started white and went red, and on in a rushing wind. I tried to breathe, but my breath would not come, and I felt myself rush bodily out of myself, and out and out and out, and all the time bodily in the wind. I went out swiftly, all of myself, and I knew I was dead, and that it had all been a mistake to think you just died. Then I floated. Instead of going on, I felt myself slide back. I breathed, and I was back. The ground was torn up in front of my head, and there was a splintered beam of wood. In the jolt of my head, I heard someone crying. I thought somebody was screaming. I tried to move, but I could not move. I heard the machine guns and rifles firing across the river and all along the river. There was a great splashing. I saw the star shells go and up and burst and float whitely, and rockets going up, and heard the bombs, and all this in a moment, and then I heard close to me someone saying, "Mamma mia, oh, mamma mia." I pulled and twisted and got my legs loose finally and turned around and touched him. It was Pacini. When I touched him, he screamed. His legs were toward me, and I saw in the dark and the light that they were both smashed above the knee. One leg was gone, the other was held by tendons, and part of the trouser and the stump twitched and jerked as though it were not connected. He bit his arm and moaned, "Oh, mamma mia, Dio te salva Maria, Dio te salva Maria, oh, Jesus, shoot me, mamma mia, oh, purest, lovely Mary, shoot me, stop it. And then choking, mamma mia, then he was quiet, biting his arm, the stump of his leg twitching. I should be holding my hands cupped. I tried to get closer to Pacini to try to put a tourniquet on his legs, but I could not. I tried again, and my legs moved a little. I could pull backward along with my arms and elbows. Pacini was quiet now. I sat beside him, undid my tunic, and tried to rip the tail of my shirt. It would not rip, and I bit the edge of the cloth to start, and then I thought of his puttees, which are sort of like knickers. I had on wool stockings, but Pacini wore puttees. All the drivers wore puttees, but Pacini only had one leg. I unwound the puttee, and while I was doing it, I saw there was no need to try and make a turning it because he was dead already. I was sure he was dead. There were 3 others to locate. I sat straight up, and as I did, something inside my head moved like the weight on a doll's eyes, and it hit me inside in the back of my eyeballs. My leg felt warm and wet, and my shoes were wet and warm inside. I knew that I was hit and leaned over and put my hand on my knee. My knee wasn't there. My hand went in, and my knee was down on my shin. I wiped my hand on my shirt, and another floating light came very slowly down. I looked at my leg and was very afraid. "Oh, God," I said, "get me out of here." I knew, however, that there had been 3 others. There were 4 drivers. Pacini was dead. That left 3. Someone took hold of me under the arms, and someone else lifted my legs. So delayed decoding here in this moment of watching Pacini's leg get blown off and then die by bleeding out, and the repetition, Pacini was dead. He keeps coming back to that because it's the reality that he has a hard time grasping. But the delayed decoding means that he's bringing in the details of the moment as they are happening. He's decoding the moment and discovering that his own leg, his own knee has been blown off, and he can't stand, and his feet are warm with blood. and he's going to be unable to help the three others. So here is the moment of Fred's initiation toward disillusionment with the war. And it's his injury that's going to place him in a hospital where Catherine is going to come visit him and further their love relationship. And so immediately we get an important passage, and that is a passage where a soldier is talking about the courage and the honor and the pride of defending one's country and the dignity that one develops by behaving well at war. And Fred's response is this: I did not say anything. I was always embarrassed by the words sacred, glorious, and sacrifice, and the expression in vain. We'd heard them, sometimes standing in the rain almost out of earshot, so that only the shouted words came through. We'd read them on proclamations that were slapped up by bill posters over other proclamations, now for a long time, and I hadn't seen nothing sacred in the war. And things that were glorious had no glory, and the sacrifices were like the stockyards of Chicago if nothing was done with the meat except to bury it. And so we get this beginning of Fred's conversion, if you will, his initiation into disillusionment that defines Hemingway's texts. That he'd seen war, he'd had his leg blown off, he'd seen Pacini bleed out to death, and he'd seen sacrifices, that the ultimate sacrifice of losing one's life, and he compares it to rotten meat in a Chicago stockyard that's taken outside and buried. No nourishment, no purpose to it, as if it had died, certainly in vain. So we get this beginning of Frederick's rejection of war as sacred, as full of glory, as sacrifice, as the defining aspects of the soldier. Here he's realizing there's no such thing, at least in this war. And he goes on to say, there are many words that you could not stand to hear, and finally only the names of places had dignity. That's important. The names of the rivers, the names of the towns. Certain numbers were the same way, and certain dates, and these with the names of the places were all you could say and have them mean anything. Abstract words such as glory, honor, courage, or hallow, or obscene beside the concrete names of villages, the numbers of roads, the names of rivers, the numbers of regiments, and the dates. This is a reoccurring theme in Hemingway. Just the facts of the war are enough for the soldier. No need to falsely abstract on the glory, honor, and courage and the hallowedness of their behavior, because it's not real. Only the rivers, the battles, the towns, and the regiments were real. And you get this great conversation between Catherine, all on the same topic here, about Frederick's initiation toward disillusionment. And Catherine says, there's a great quote, "The coward dies 1,000 deaths, the brave but one." Of course, who said it? I don't know. He's probably a coward, Catherine said. He knew a great deal about cowards, but nothing about the brave. The brave dies perhaps 2,000 deaths if he's intelligent. He simply doesn't mention them. And so what this quote, what Catherine's getting at here and trying to convince Frederick of, is that if you're if you're a thinking person, you die 2,000 deaths. That is, that yourself is repeatedly ruined during war. And the one ultimate death that will come is preceded by these many figurative deaths to the self. You just don't mention them. You learn from them, you live on, and you try to minimize your mistakes. Okay? And Frederick does that. When he is healed in battle, he returns to the front, and he tries to help as best he can in the Italian ambulance service, and then we get that great passage on the retreat at Caporetto where the Italians have to flee from the Austrian offensive. But more on this topic of Frederick's initiation toward disillusionment. And again, in connection to Abruzzi here is the peasant wisdom of the Basque common people who are admired for their understanding of the world and the war because they're defeated from the beginning. We think we are not peasants, we are mechanics. But even the peasants know better than to believe in a war. Everybody hates war. There's a class that controls a country that is stupid and down and does not realize anything and never can. That is why we have this war. Also, they make money out of it. But the peasants, they were beaten to start with. Right? That's important. They were beaten when they took them from their farms and put them in the army. That is why the peasant has wisdom, because he's defeated from the start. Put him in power and see how wise he is. And so here's this reoccurring theme in Hemingway, that it's the common people that he admires, the people who know the land, the people who have no chance for social mobility, the people who don't aspire to be in a higher class, that all they have is what they can make with their hands and what they can do with their will. And so they take great pride in what they can achieve within their limited amount of social mobility. They're defeated, if you will, by society from the start, so they don't harbor false abstractions like nobility and sacrifice and hallowedness of behavior. And that's why they reject the war. If they were in power, there would be no war. Now, let's talk a little bit about the relationship that's emerging between Frederick and Catherine. Remember that the priest encouraged Fred to be in love, and then he'll love God, to make sacrifices for the one you love for, to serve the one you love for, and then we get this passage. Often a man wishes to be alone, and a girl wishes to be alone too. If they love each other, they are jealous of that in each other. But I can truly say that we never felt that. We could feel alone when we were together, alone against the others, but we were never lonely and never afraid when we were together. And then Catherine goes on to say, why, darling, I don't live at all when I'm not with you. And so here we have this great passage. How else do you know when you're in love? It's a great book to gain a working definition of love. You know when you're in love when you can be alone with someone and not have to talk and not feel lonely when you're in the same room with someone else. But yet feel alone, separate, independent, and not jealous of the independence and the autonomy of the other, but know that they admire that and the autonomy and independence of the other, because you know your love bond is so strong. And I think that's what Catherine and Fred develop, and that leads him to a faith, not necessarily in God, but a faith in the self and the faith in the power of love. And so continuing on in the novel, Catherine comes to the hospital in Milan where Frederick's nursing his knee injury. He falls in love with Catherine. And the two doctors come in and try to fix him. And Dr. Valentini is, this guy with a mustache. He's like, we'll fix you up in the morning. And Verini wants to have multiple doctors look at the leg and get second opinion. But what Hemingway admires is one who has confidence and can complete tasks well, is able to do it. And he makes this comment: I've noticed that doctors who fail in the practice of medicine have a tendency to seek one another's company and aid in consultation, whereas Valentini says, I can fix you up, we'll have you ready to go in the morning, we'll get you back at the front, and we'll have a couple of drinks to celebrate. And so just a side note on completing tasks well, another code principle. Let's go to the retreat at Caporetto and the firing squad that occurs. Here, the Austrians have come down, and Frederick's in this retreat. Everyone just starts running, and they get there. Frederick has to decide which side road they're going to take to escape well, and he chooses this one side road. That was a bad choice because it was muddy, and they get their jeep stuck, or truck stuck, and a couple of sergeants run away, and Frederick shoots them, or at least he shoots one of them. And here they are continuing on their retreat, and they run into these Italian officers who weren't at the front, Austrian front, but were watching this retreat. And this mad chaos that's occurring. He walks into this bizarre conversation with this Italian officer who says, "Why are you not with your regiment?" And he told them, "Because they're in a retreat." "Do you not know that an officer should be with his troops?" He did. That was all. Another officer spoke. It is you and such as you that have led the barbarians onto the sacred soil of the fatherland. Notice the language here, sacred, barbarians, fatherland. This is the language here that Frederick has rejected. I beg your pardon, said the Lieutenant Colonel. It's because of treachery, such as yours, that we have lost the fruits of victory. Notice the language, fruits of victory, treachery. Have you ever been in a retreat, Lieutenant Colonel asked? Italy should never retreat. Well, they're retreating. We stood there in the rain and listened to this. We were facing the officers, and the prisoner stood in front a little to one side of us. If you're going to shoot me, Lieutenant Colonel said, please shoot me at once without further questioning. This questioning is stupid. This is Lieutenant Colonel, Italian Colonel leaving, who was retreating with Frederick. He made the sign of the cross. The officers spoke together. One wrote something on a pad of paper, abandoned his troops, ordered to be shot. 2 Carabinieri took Lieutenant Colonel to the riverbank. He walked in the rain, the old man with his hat off, the Carabinieri on the other side. I did not watch them shoot him, but I heard the shots. They were questioning someone else. So here's Frederick waiting to be questioned and to be shot. This officer, too, was separated from his troops. He was not allowed to make an explanation. He cried when they read the sentence from the pad of paper, and they were questioning another when they shot him. Made of point intent on questioning the next man, while the man who had been questioned before was being shot. In this way, there was obviously nothing they could do about it. I did not know whether I would wait to be questioned or make a break now. I was obviously, to the Italian sergeants, the military police, a German in Italian uniform. I saw how their minds worked, if they had minds, and if they worked. They were all young men, and they were saving their country, right? Notice the mocking tone there. The Second Army was being reformed beyond the Tagliamento. They were executing officers of the rank of major and above, and who were separated from their troops. They were also dealing summarily with German agitators in Italian uniform. They wore steel helmets. Only 2 of us had steel helmets. Some of the Carabinieri had them. The other Carabinieri wore the wide hat, airplanes we called them. We stood in the rain. We were taken out one at a time to be questioned and shot. So far, they had shot everyone they had questioned. The questioners had this beautiful detachment and devotion to stern justice. Again, the language of detachment. No thinking at all, and devotion to stern justice. Of men dealing in death without being in danger of it. They were questioning a full colonel of the Line Regiment. 3 more officers had just been put in with us. I looked down at the Carabinieri. They were looking at the newcomers. The others were looking at the colonel. I ducked down, pushed between 2 men, and ran for the river. My head down, I tripped to the edge and went in with a splash. The water was very cold, and I stayed under as long as I could. I could feel the current swirl me, and stayed under until I thought I could never come up. The minute I came up with a breath, I went down again. It was easy to stay under with so much clothing and my boots. When I came up the second time, I saw a piece of timber ahead of me and reached it and held with one hand. I kept my head behind it and did not even look over it. I did not want to see the bank. There were shots when I ran and shots when I came up the first time. I heard them. I was almost above water. There were no shots now. The piece of timber swung in the current, and I held it with one hand. I looked at the bank. It seemed to be going by very fast. There was much wood in the stream. The water was very cold. We passed the brush of an island above the water. I held on to the timber with both hands and let it take me along. The shore was out of sight now. So here is, in a great reaction here, his anger was washed away in the river along with any obligation. This is Frederick's baptism. This is his new self. This is his escape from the immorality that occurs during war. The retreat, he was doing the best he could, and he gets captured by these Italian officers. He's about to be shot because they believe he's a German in Italian uniform. There's no logic, there's no reasoning, and he's not about to make that sacrifice for these unthinking people. And so he creates his farewell to arms, his goodbye to fighting in a war that disallows one to conduct oneself well. So he goes to Milan and he meets this count, another father figure. Remember that Hemingway lost his father to suicide. And so Hemingway was always looking for father figures, and so are his characters. And after the priest serves as a father figure on Love, he meets this count who's been in many wars, and he says, he has no regrets in his life. He doesn't worry about death because he's lived a full life. And he says this to Frederick as they're playing pool never forget that love is a religious feeling. So there's that connection back to the priest, that if you sacrifice for another, you serve another, you know that you're in love. When you're alone you're together in the same room, yet feel alone and independent and autonomous and separate, you're in love. And this leads to a religious feeling, a feeling of salvation, a feeling of contentment, a feeling of faith. And so, after the retreat, Catherine and Frederick are able to row across in a boat to Switzerland and live together away from the war. But he has a fine time there with her as she's pregnant. He wants to marry her, and he worries about not being married to her, but Catherine isn't worried about it because she's initiated on that. She saw how marriage went, or her engagement went last time, didn't change the horrible things that happened to her husband. And so they're just together, but Fred can't sleep. And one of the questions is, is it because of his insomnia? Is it because of what he's seen at the war? Is it because of the coldnesses that he's seen? Or is it because they've created this unit, they're against the world, that they are so separate from anything. They're not really living in a town where they have jobs and a purpose. They are sort of together trying to create this immunity from the war. And then it rains, it stops snowing, and Catherine gets closer to her birth, and they got to come out of the mountains, the snowy mountains of nobility, and come down to the hospital. And she signs in. I think it's important that she signs in as Catherine Henry, even though she's not. And she signs in that she has no religion. And we'll come back to that when we go to the last passages here. Let's go to this passage in the hotel before we get down to the hospital where Catherine's going to give birth. It says this, that night at the hotel in our room, with a long empty hall outside, and our shoes outside the door, a thick carpet on the floor of the room, outside the window, the rain falling, and the room light and pleasant and cheerful, and then the light out, and exciting with smooth sheets, and the bed, comfortable, feeling that we had come home, feeling no longer alone, waking in the night to find the other one there, not gone away, all other things were unreal, this is their relationship against the world. We slept when we were tired, and if we woke, the other one woke too, so one was not alone. Often a man wishes to be alone, and a girl wishes to be alone too, and if they love each other, they are jealous of that in the other, but I can say truly that we never felt that. We could feel alone when we were together, alone against the others. There's that great moment that they know they're really in love, but we were never lonely and never afraid when we were together. The night is not the same as the day. All things are different. That things of the night cannot be explained in the day, because they do not then exist, and the night can be a dreadful time for lonely people once their loneliness has started. But with Catherine, there was almost no difference in the night, except that it was even a better time. If people bring so much courage to the world has to kill them to break them. So that after that, comment about being in love and never feeling alone, never feeling lonely, but being able to be alone when together, Hemingway writes this: if people bring so much courage to the world has to kill them to break them. So of course it kills them. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. But those that it will not break, it kills. It kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially. If you're none of these, be sure it will kill you too. There'll be no special hurry. So it's a very dark 20th century modern view of the world as a place that breaks the self, breaks the hope that the world is an ennobling place, that the world is a place where you can live morally and with great dignity. But the key passage here I put in the box there is that yes, it will break you. It will destroy you. Remember the line from Old Man and the Sea: a man can be destroyed but not defeated. But you got to because you need to get strong in the broken places. yes, he wanted to prove himself at war. He was disillusioned with war, and so he found a way out and escaped and created a new self. Yes, he was had no faith in love, and now he's developed the faith in love, and he's getting strong in that broken place of faithlessness toward love. All right, let's keep going. Well, you get this passage before the tragic ending in the hospital where Hemingway remembers when he was out camping, we can presume fishing, hopefully fly fishing, where he saw a bunch of ants on a log, and he wrote this: "Once in camp, I put a log on a fire and it was full of ants. As it commenced to burn, the ants swarmed out and went toward the center where the fire was, then turned back toward the end. When there were enough on the end, they fell into the fire. Some got out, their bodies burnt and flattened, and went off not knowing where they were going. Most of them went toward the fire, and then back toward the end and swarmed, cool end, and finally fell off into the fire. I remember thinking at the time that it was the end of the world, and a splendid chance to be Messiah, and lift the log off the fire and throw it out where the ants could get up onto the ground. But I did not do anything but throw a tin cup of water on the log, so that I would have a cup empty to put the whiskey in before I added water to it. I think the cup of water on the burning log only steamed the ants." So the question here is, why does Fred recall that he was no Messiah for the ants on the log and the fire? What does he conclude about being saved religiously? Here's his great chance to be a Messiah and help these ants, but he doesn't. He just steams them with his water. So one of the thoughts here is that Hemingway doesn't believe in asking for outside forces to come to one's rescue. Remember the passage from In Our Time, oh God, save me, save me, save me, please Jesus, I'll tell everyone about you." And then the soldier was saved, not by Jesus necessarily, but then he goes on, he's just saved, and he goes on to tell no one about Jesus. And so here's this rejection of outside forces. It's all up to the self. If you're going to survive at war, it can be because of some of the things you do well, and often you won't survive at war, even though you're doing things well. But if you are able to come through, one has to get strong in the broken places. If one loses a love, one must get strong in the broken places, as Catherine is, and love intensely. Let's look at the end where Catherine dies in childbirth. The baby is stillborn. Frederick Henry feels no connection to it, and then we know this very sad ending that Catherine dies after this hemorrhaging during this very tragic stillbirth. Now Catherine would die. That's what you did. You died. You did not know what it was about. You never had time to learn. They threw you into life and told you the rules, and the first time you got off base, they killed you, or they killed you gratuitously like Imo, or gave you the syphilis like Rinaldi, but they killed you in the end. You could count on that. Stay around and they would kill you. So going back to the 7,000 deaths from cholera, right? They kill you if you follow the rules. Life kills you if you don't follow the rules. But there is a difference. And you, as you read through these Hemingway texts, it's the characters who conduct themselves well that develop great pride and dignity in the self. Let's continue on with this, though. Here's Hemingway's comment that was the price you paid for sleeping together. This was the end of the biological trap. This is what people got for loving each other. This birth that is actually a death that leads to the death of the woman. And he says to her, "You are so brave and quiet. I forget you are suffering." And so Catherine, in the end, as she's dying, behaves very bravely, very stoically, with great honor, and deeply in love. And that is admired here in this text. But here's the final quote. "But after I got them to leave, that is the nurses and the doctor, and shut the door and turned off the light, it wasn't any good. It was like saying goodbye to a statue. After a while I went out and left the hospital and walked back to the hotel in the rain." Remember, it's always raining. The rain takes them out of the mountains. The rain recalls the mud and the decay and the sordidness of the plain versus the mountains. And it's always a foreshadowing of a lack of hope, this rain. And saying goodbye to a statue, there's no soul going to heaven. There's no afterlife, according to Hemingway, for Catherine Barkley, and he goes home dejected, alone in his hotel, and we imagine he has a very lonely night and many nights after that. But one of the great questions this novel evokes is this one that you're going to try to answer as a group. What does Fred conclude about love as a religious feeling, about faith, about being croyant, meaning having faith? What will Fred become careful about? Will he love again? And so, a couple things I need to unpack here. So remember, love is a religious feeling. He gets from both the priest and Count Greffy. If you sacrifice for another, if you do things for another, you're in love. And Count Greffy has faith. He's croyant because he has faith in himself, in love. And he says, one of the great fallacies, Count Greffy says, one of the great fallacies is that one does not become wiser in old age, you just become more careful. And so the question is, will Frederick love again? Will he commit himself wholeheartedly to another love? Will he seek out that as a religious feeling? And will he develop a faith in the self and in the will to be able to get strong in the broken places? Some students over the years have said that, yes, the novel indicates that Fred has developed this belief in the self, has developed many parts of the code, completing tasks well, being faithful to and in love, speaking through actions, and that he will eventually, after great mourning, go on to love again, because he knows that ability to do so is what leads to faith in the self and faith in this world, and ultimately will become strong in the broken places. And others say no, that he is so dejected that the only thing he ever believed in was love, and here's where love led to the biological trap of pregnancy, which led to the death of his son and death of the only one he ever loved, and so he won't love again. And so it's a great question. It's something that Hemingway left us thinking about, and I look forward to your answers on the Google Doc online discussion. And thanks for listening.